So good morning and welcome to our first panel session for our NWTRCC conference in November 2021. Today we're very pleased to have speakers from two different tax resistance groups. One in the UK called Money Rebellion, which is an arm of Extinction Rebellion, and one from Spain called Grup Antimilitarista Tortuga, which is a war tax resistance group in Spain. Money Rebellion is more focused on using tax resistance and other forms of resistance to help promote changes in how government and business are treating the climate in order to reach a state where we have true sustainability. So this morning, we have some wonderful speakers. Speaking first will be Cuti from Tortuga, from Grup Antimilitarista Tortuga, from Southeast Spain. When he begins speaking, I'll also put a link to that group in the chat. But that group is kind of a current iteration of different movements of conscientious objectors in Spain going back to the 1990s, and continue a long tradition there that's also involved and has also involved and works with different groups of environmentalists, trade unionists, and other anti-militaristic groups in Spain. We'll also be hearing from Jane Rogers from Money Rebellion. She writes novels, stories, and radio drama. She is increasingly drawn to future fiction, and New Testament of Jesse Lamb won the Arthur C. Clarke Award and was Man Booker longlisted. She is Emerita Professor of Writing at Sheffield Hallam University, and she's been an active member of Extinction Rebellion since January 2019. And we also have Dr. Alan Penson. He is a cancer biologist, and he is also a part of Extinction Rebellion Scientists and Extinction Rebellion UK Action Planning. The Extinction Rebellion UK Action Planning Circle, and I think I missed a word there. No, that's correct. Extinction Rebellion UK Action Planning Circle. So, without further ado, I will hand it off to our first speaker this morning, Cuti.
Well, hello, good morning. First, I want to apologize for my poor level of English. I will do my best. Well, I'm Cuti, a member of the anti-militarist group Tortuga, an anti-militarist group from the southeast of Spain, from Elche and surroundings, near Alicante. We are about 10 people, and we meet every 15 days, more or less. We are heirs of the insubmisos groups and movement of conscientious objectors who work against compulsory military service during the 19th. In this sense, we contribute to coordinate with other groups of AMOC, Alternativa Antimilitarista, from Madrid, Bilbao, Canarias, and Alicante, and somehow also with the War Resistance International. We also coordinate with other social groups from all over the state, which also participate in the campaign, environmentalists, trade unions, and other anti-militarists. Among our work, we highlight the non-violent direct action, the creation of content, books, and the website, grupotortuga.com. We also carry out training workshops, and of course, we participate in the campaign of Fiscal Objection to the military gesture in the Spanish state. We have a web, I will put in the chat, you can see, about the campaign. This is a campaign of pure civil disobedience as such is framed in the tradition and strategy of non-violence. Our campaign is called Fiscal Objection to Military Spending and consists of not collaborating with the state in the expense of preparations of wars and military structure, actively disobeying at the moment of making the declaration of the income tax. Technically, we take advantage of the declaration of taxes to divert a part of projects to projects that work in the defense of a solidary social progress. In addition to taking advantage of the tax declaration to make diffusion and denounce military spending. In our campaign, anyone can object and any amount can be diverted. The person is the one who decides. But because of the increasing control of the tax agency, we propose now, in this year, we propose small amounts. This is not the case in Navarra and the base country, where the tax office has been transferred. And they have a little different office. Previously, a few years ago, we proposed to divert large amount of money equivalent to the total military spending per person, about €1,000 per person per year. In addition to creating our own content with analysis, we elaborate the study of the general state's budgets for each year. The study is in this web. To give you a real objective approach, we study the general state budgets each year and bring to light the real military spending in Spain. In this way, we discovered items that originally do not appear within the recognized expenditure, basically from the Ministry of Defense. In addition, we add agencies like the CNI, that is the spies, Royal House, etc., and special programs of armament, investments, research and development. We add the extra budget calculated proportionally from previous years and the interest of the debt that all this generates. The hidden military expenditure is more than 4 times higher than the explicit military expenditure, even adding the items that defense pretends to exclude, such as the CNI and the investment in weapons. In addition to the Ministry of Defense, the Ministry of Industry, Foreign Affairs, Ecological Transitions, Agriculture, Labor and Economy, Education, Social Security, King's House, Culture and Sports, Presidency, Transport, Health, European Contribution, etc., participate with semi-hidden items in the Ministry of Defense. According to our calculations, military spending in Spain accounts for more or less 40% of state's investments, reaching, according to our figures, more than 14 billion. If we add this to the spending of the Ministry of Interior, we reach 43 billion. This makes of euros. This makes a dividend about 900 euros per person per year in military spending. Now I am going to talk about the data. Many collectives adhere to the campaign, but only a few hundred people take part in the actions in Spain. This year we have participated about 400 people, diverting a total of almost 25,000 euros to more than 100 social projects, including the Wars Resistance International, anti-militarist groups in the States and Colombia, and groups in Lleida and in the base country. Finally, the campaign in Spain, in the Spanish states, is a living campaign with a tradition of more than 30 years, with almost is a minority, which although in a minority is still being carried out, although is now decreasing due to the administrative harassment that we are enduring. And this is all. I would like to thank for the invitation to participate in this event.
Thank you, Cuti. I'm just sorry. I'm just having one small technical difficulty here. Just I'm trying. Oh yes, here we go. All right, so yes, thank you, Cuti, for sharing the situation in Spain. I'm sure there'll be many questions about it when we get to that section. And but now we will turn it over to Jane Rogers and hear about Money Rebellion and Extinction Rebellion UK.
Thank you. Thanks, Cuti, and thanks, Lincoln. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Yes.
Oh, perfect. Very good. Okay, I'm going to share my screen just to give you something a bit more exciting to look at than me, really. So here goes with the screen sharing. And that's it. Okay, so I've just got a few images to illustrate what I'm talking about. Basically, I'm going to start by giving you a bit of background about Extinction Rebellion. I'm sure some of you know about it. It may even be that some of you are members, but there's no reason why everybody should know. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to start by giving you a bit of background about Extinction Rebellion itself. And I'll talk about Money Rebellion and why that's grown out of Extinction Rebellion. And then I'll move on to the thinking behind the Earth Tax strike, its aims and how we set it up, and also some things that seem to me to be problems. And I think it's very helpful that you've got two of us talking here, because I suspect Alex is a bit more positive than I am. So that's quite a good counterbalance. So, okay, just to whip through quickly what we're talking about. Can you does that, sorry, I'm just thinking, can you see the right-hand end of that image, or do I need to make the image smaller? It's hidden on my screen.
I believe we can see the entire image when you're showing it.
Okay, cool. That's great. Okay, so just to whip through the reasons for Extinction Rebellion, basically, the amount of carbon dioxide parts per million in the atmosphere over the last 200 years has doubled. And that's entirely due to man-made emissions. And the consequences of that, as I'm sure you all know, are that the sea levels are rising due to melting ice. There are very malignant weather systems, terrible storms, typhoons, droughts, desertification of the land, and crop failure. There are deaths due to heat stress, and ultimately there is, in certain areas, famine, there is mass migration, and there is war. So we take it pretty seriously. And the changes are exemplified by this little image of the ocean. You've got in the top part, obviously, you've got the ocean as a carbon sink. And now in 2016, that ocean, because it's been warmed and acidified, it's a source of carbon. It no longer absorbs carbon. In terms of ecology, you've got 10,000 years ago, human beings were 1% of the creatures on this planet, and 99% of the creatures were wild creatures. And now 36% of the creatures on this planet are human, and 4% are wild, and 60-odd% are animals that we eat. So, this is Greta Thunberg, whose Fridays for the Future, I'm sure, happens in the States as much as it does everywhere else in the world. She's lent, you know, her voice to our movement. Should we spread false hope? We can't do that. We have to tell the truth. We need to get angry and transform that anger into action. We can't save the world by playing by the rules, because the rules have to be changed. But we're not interested in breaking the rules in a violent way. That's not the plan. So we have 3 demands, and our demands are, firstly, that the government and the media should declare a climate emergency. Secondly, that everyone should commit to zero carbon by 2025, which is very soon now. And thirdly, that there should be, the government should should allow for a citizens' assembly, which will be able to direct the government on climate policy. And basically, what we want can be summarized in two phrases: tell the truth and act as if the truth is real. Neither of which are happening at the moment. So non-violence is very important in Extinction Rebellion. We believe in non-violent civil disobedience, and that's one reason for using tax resistance, because it is a form, as you know, a form of civil disobedience, which is non-violent. And all these great people are leaders of successful non-violent disobedience. So, Extinction Rebellion has grown and spread in the 2 years since it began. And looking at this, you can see actually there's loads of Extinction Rebellion groups in the States. So, yeah. And now on to Money Rebellion. Money Rebellion was started this year. So it's the sort of latest iteration, if you like. It was started because of thinking about how massive finance is still being put into fossil fuels, despite the 2015 Paris Agreement, which said that global warming needed to be limited to 1.5 degrees. Since 2015, and that's what this chart is showing you, starts 2016 to 2019, JP Morgan is top of the list. They have managed to put more than $268 billion into supporting and financing fossil fuel industries since that Paris Agreement. And as you can see, they're not the only one. The list goes on and on. And basically, you know, if you think about it, our financial system is geared to perpetual growth. That's what capitalism demands. You must go on consuming, you must go on buying things, you must go on making things to buy. And the earth can't sustain perpetual growth. So actually our whole financial system, you know, is really failing us. And that's why financial disobedience begins to seem like a very logical step forward. We've got to persuade the government, and we've got to persuade people about these banks that they are destroying us, that they are destroying our planet. Basically, we started to work out ways of disobeying financially, and there have been 2 major arms of that movement. One is to target banks, to target dirty banks, and to attempt to make customers aware that it's possible to have ethical banking and that they don't need to bank with Barclays, HSBC, the banks here in the UK that are investing huge amounts in fossil fuels. And then the second idea is to withhold tax, both income tax, which is what I'm mainly speaking about, and council tax, which Alex will tell you a bit more about. Income tax is the tax we pay on our income to the central government. So the government is spending, we've worked out they're spending a minimum of 3% of our tax on bailing out fossil fuel companies, building new roads, subsidizing air travel, and destroying ancient woodlands. And basically, they spend vastly more on dirty energy than clean energy. So we decided to withhold 3%. And I should say now, because Cuti and you yourselves, you're basically interested in war, resistance because of war and military expenditure. We made the decision after some discussion not to include military expenditure in that 3%, for the simple reason that we felt that there were issues there that were arguable. In particular, arguments have raged in this country about whether we should have nuclear submarines, the Trident missiles. And we didn't want to muddy the waters. We didn't want to confuse the issue of that actually what we're campaigning for is for the government to stop funding fossil fuels, full stop. And if we included military expenditure, people would start fussing about defense and they would start to mount different arguments. So, you can argue it and maybe we'll discuss it afterwards. It's not included in our total anyway. So now to tell you how we went about it. To begin with, we checked what the legal and financial penalties for withholding tax are. And they're not particularly severe. And anyway, we put them up on our website for other rebels to see. And we wrote an Earth Tax Strike pledge, pledging to withhold 3% of tax. And we put that up and asked activists to sign up. And that actually gave us the list of names and contacts of the people who've joined the action. Then we wrote a template letter for those activists to send to Her Majesty's Revenue and Customs, which is the name of the tax office. And that letter is well researched and detailed and gives the full reasons why we're withholding the tax, how we arrived at the 3% sum, and it sets out our demands. And as you can see on the screen, these are our demands. In particular, act now to stop financing and enabling destruction, stop subsidizing and funding fossil fuels and allowing new fossil fuels to be extracted. And it's completely incredible that our government, who is hosting COP26 at the moment, is currently engaged in opening a new coal mine and a new gas field in the North Sea. Cancel HS2, that's the high-speed rail link, which is destroying the woodlands and creating all sorts of emissions, and the road building program, £27 billion worth of it. No more bailouts of destructive industries. So these are our demands. And then we come to the issue of what to do with our withheld tax. Initially, we thought that everybody should pay their 3% that they're withholding into an escrow account, so that all the money was in one place and we would know, where it was and how much it was. But after some discussion, we decided against that because we would have had to pay for the account. And also it turns out that the government can force a bank to hand over money if they reckon the money's due to them in the form of taxes. So what we've decided to do is to simply withhold our tax. Each person withholds it for a year. And in a year's time, if the government have not agreed to our demands, we donate it to an Earth regeneration charity, which we have already made an agreement with. And then the next thing we had to do, obviously, was to publicize our campaign. And we spent quite a lot of time on this. We wrote a press release, we wrote social media releases, we made a video, which is on YouTube, to publicize the action. We publicized it through Extinction Rebellion channels, such as Writers Rebel and newsletters, and local groups and banners and leaflets. But, and this isn't a picture of the but, this is just a picture, I should say. this is a picture. This is where Alex is at the moment. This is a picture of Glasgow last week. I've just got 3 pictures of it to round this off because it's nice to see lots of activists in the streets. The but is the problem, which is that we have had very low uptake. We have only around about 100 people actually taking part in this action, despite all our efforts. And I can give you some of the reasons why I think this has happened. One is that this particular action can only be taken by self-employed people. In the UK, and I think our systems are different in the States and in the UK, but in the UK, if you are employed, your employer deducts your tax before you get paid. So your pay is net with there's no more tax to pay. That makes it impossible, obviously, to withhold your tax. So our action can only be taken by people who pay their own tax directly to the tax office, which is to say self-employed writers, artists, musicians, small business owners, farmers, actors. I mean, it sounds like a lot, but it's actually a limited number of people, particularly when you think that some of those groups of people don't earn a lot of money. I mean, and I've spoken to writer friends who don't earn enough to even to pay tax. And then I think the other thing is that our publicity has not been tremendously successful. The YouTube video, for example, I checked that the other day. I think it's only had about 3,000 views. So, yeah. We hope to attract some big names, maybe writers or actors who would lend a high profile to the action. And we've not had any success with that. And our press release was not taken up by the media. And I think that may be because it's simply not a visual action. You know, there's not much to actually look at. And the response from the tax office to our action so far has been very, very low key. What they've done, they've sent each of us a letter, and the letter states, quote, "We are absolutely committed to doing everything in our power to support zero carbon emissions targets," which is very nice to know. But they say it's their statutory duty to collect tax. And that's it. So far, there are no dramatic repercussions. And unfortunately, I think the problem is when there's no drama, there's not really any news. So that's a problem. Anyway, I'm going to finish there. That's my last picture. And as you can see, I hope, if you look at the name of the bank, that is the Red Rebels of Extinction Rebellion last week demonstrating outside JP Morgan in Glasgow, and a lot of very excitable members of the press taking their photo. So I will now pass you over to Alex in Glasgow. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Jane. And yes, and I will now switch us over to Alex. I'm just switching the recording. All right. Yeah, so here is Alex Penson, who is coming to us live from the COP26. So I'll hand it over to you.
Thanks. Yeah, so I was part of a march, the Global Day of Action, which maybe you saw earlier. And then now I've walked down to the Bank of Scotland, which was one of the first central banks to issue paper currency, interestingly. Yeah, so I will talk a little bit about Money Rebellion. Oh, actually, I should answer some of the questions, I think. Someone asked about citizens' assemblies. And I think this is really, really exciting. Since joining XR maybe 2 years ago, when I first joined XR 2 years ago, the third demand about citizens' assemblies seemed curious. I didn't fully understand it. And since then, it feels to me like it's felt better and better as a compelling solution to the problems of society breaking down, climate and ecological breakdown. The difference with existing parliamentary systems, that is representative democracy, citizens' assemblies are a form of a new category of democracy referred to generally as deliberative democracy. So they basically they force conversations. So the way that a citizens' assembly works is that you pick people off a voter roll at random, so much like jury service. You might pick 100, sometimes it's larger than that, so a few hundred. Then you divide that group, the citizens' assembly, into small teams of, for example, 10, again at random. And the small team have to decide on an answer to usually a very specific question. So it could be anything, but the UK has had one recently. There was one in France. They decided on all kinds of policies that are far, far more progressive than existing governments. I think the point is that they are much less pressured by outside influences, special interests, and just people have members of the public know what they want in a way that their representatives often don't, right? Representatives are often highly educated and professional politicians, and that's the root, a real part of the cause of a lot of the issues that we've seen. So I guess another part of it is that citizens' assemblies are a way to have like a really powerful legitimacy for many of the difficult challenges that we face with decarbonisation, right? You can imagine rapid decarbonisation will bring a lot of difficult compromises in society. And so if the public feel like it is really the public that is making these decisions, then that's a way for them to actually stick. So anyway, would be happy to talk about that more. There was a second question, wasn't there? Was why are we against road building? That's a specific road building program in the UK, which is absolutely vast and would again just destroy a lot of natural habitat. The UK is already very densely populated with lots of roads. I think just the feeling is this is a completely absurd direction to take during like an ecological emergency, right? We need more wild spaces rather than more roads, right? More traffic, more emissions. Anyway, I will talk about money rebellion from my point of view. So the very early, when Extinction Rebellion first started, it focused on blocking roads in the center of the capital city of whichever country. And this was, this had certain strong effects. The government in the UK did, or Parliament in the UK did in fact declare a climate emergency. Many of there was a citizens' assembly in the UK, although, you could easily criticize it. Money Rebellion came out of that as a way for people to feel more involved at home. A way to connect together lots of small actions into something larger. So that's one aspect of the Money Rebellion tactics. Money Rebellion's tactics involved a very wide variety of tactics. So it was supposed to be something for everyone. And the strategy, I guess, the targets of Money Rebellion are focused on the financial and economic aspects, rather than purely going to government buildings and parliament. So I think that has been highly successful. The focus of Extinction Rebellion has broadened very much since the early days, when the messaging was, as Jane mentioned, the original demands. Those had the ring. The implication was that XR would make a lot of noise, and the government would just cave and do what we wanted. And I mean, I think it's become clear that that's not the case. There are many other parts of the puzzle, and a really important part of the puzzle is the ideology of economic growth, and particularly very powerful multinational institutions, as Jane mentioned, JP Morgan, a classic example of a huge, powerful bank which will just carry on investing in fossil fuels until forced to stop, basically. So tactics that Money Rebellion has used include very small ones. So this is stickering on ATMs, is an interesting one. So many retail banks in the UK have an investment arm. So Barclays is a good example, and HSBC. There are ATMs for those two banks on many high streets across the country. And so just putting a sticker saying Barclays, climate criminal, this bank has invested this much in fossil fuels, just stick it on the ATM. It has two effects, right? It is a really simple way to get new members to just do something a little bit dangerous, make them feel a little bit included, make them it's a small gesture of just saying, I'm not okay with this. And I found that really compelling. And then another effect of that is to communicate to members of the public that won't have known that. They'll be like, what's wrong with Barclays? I just have a bank account. Like, sorry, it's just a bank account. But when you keep seeing that message, like Barclays has invested this many billions in fossil fuels since the Paris Agreement, you're like, well, when are they ever going to stop? So I think that really does get people's mind sort of turning. It does really cut to it does really switch people on to the idea that this is like a massive sort of system-wide issue, which I think is really important, rather than just sort of blaming the Prime Minister, or just saying like, oh well, this one person just needs to, rather than just blaming it on some particular part. I think it really illustrates the wider issue. Another tactic that Money Rebellion has used at the other end of the spectrum is smashing windows of banks. So this has been done in a very sort of safe way. So early in the morning, using like goggles and safety equipment. And also these are highly, they're very reinforced glass. So you use a chisel and a big hammer, and you make a small hole in the window, and it shatters. So it makes for a good photo. And this has all been done with tons and tons of like suffragette messaging. So the suffragettes in the UK they also broke an awful lot of windows, and they used the slogan, better broken windows than broken promises. And I should say that action, when I first heard about it, before it happened, I felt it felt a little bit wrong to me. The window smashing felt, I don't know, I felt uncomfortable. And I must say that after it's happened, especially with all the suffragette messaging, it just feels so compelling and so, I don't know, I guess profound. And we have heard from members, from people that work at those banks, Barclays, HSBC, JP Morgan, were the three, that it is something that they then have to explain to new recruits. People will ask them, or members of their family will ask them, like, so wait, weren't those people that smashed the windows of your bank? It got a huge amount of press, and it really just delegitimizes these companies further. So a bit like the ATM sticker, just seeing that message, like Barclays is not okay. Barclays is doing this bad thing. Barclays is not okay. Just hearing that message again and again is just a way of hopefully loosening that whole system. So I think I should switch over to talking about council tax strikes. Is that right? So Jane talked about the income tax strike. And I think the way that I would explain it is that, so I, as I said, Money Rebellion, the idea is to have a whole long menu of different tactics, and that won't work for everyone, but hopefully there will be something there that that does appeal. And so, yeah, the income tax strike only works for people that don't have all of their tax withheld. Whereas council tax, that also doesn't apply to everyone. It's only property owners, basically. So council tax is interesting because it was born from an extremely unpopular tax in the 80s called the poll tax. The poll tax inspired an extremely successful tax resistance campaign, which ultimately ended in violent riots, and the poll tax was scrapped, and ultimately it became localized council taxes. So each local region in the UK gets some control over how it charges council tax, but it's still quite a regressive tax and unpopular for that reason. And many local councils, as you can imagine, are not, paying attention to climate and ecological breakdown in any way, right? Like there are, there are obvious signs of, it's easy to draw. There are lots of areas of the UK that have been flooded. Is a simple example, right? Increased temperatures mean that the air is able to hold more water, which leads to more flooding, right? It's as simple as that. And many parts of the UK have been very seriously flooded and will be even more seriously flooded in the future. And so lots of people in the UK and around the world are legitimately concerned about getting flooded, right? And so they go to their council and say, excuse me, what are you doing about this? And it turns out absolutely nothing. Like they haven't even thought about it. They don't know about it. And so that is a legitimate reason for a council tax strike. There are many local issues that have been folded into council tax strikes. For example, near London, there is a planned incinerator, which would be burning a lot of plastic and like stuff that in principle could be recycled. It's in a low income area of London, unsurprisingly. And anyway, that is the subject of quite a successful council tax strike. What else to say? Jane said that the repercussions for not paying 3% of your income tax are quite low. That's true for withholding a small fraction of your council tax as well. But some of the council tax strikers in exile have withheld all of their council tax, and that brings much more serious repercussions. So they send round bailiffs to repossess stuff. Some of these strikers have then refused to let the bailiffs in, and the bailiffs not being, they are local. I'm going to get this a little bit wrong, but the bailiffs can't force entry. And so if you don't let them in, they go home. And then they have got back in touch with the local authorities, who have again then started a letter writing campaign. And it's tended to go round in circles. So there are one or two of the council tax strikers who've withheld their whole council tax, where there's been no repossession and they haven't been forced to pay it. However, after a certain amount of time, the council is able to bring a case against them, and they could potentially face prison time. And a couple of the strikers are comfortable with that, like they will take it that far. And so this is again an example of pairing different kinds of approaches. And, some people feel strongly enough about a local issue or an issue like flooding that they will withhold all of their council tax in order to initiate that kind of dialogue with their local council and face very serious consequences. And yet, on the other end of the spectrum are people that are withholding like a token amount of council tax, again, in order to initiate a conversation, and the repercussions there are much, much smaller. Again, so some of the council tax campaigns have been a really compelling part of other movements. But anyway, maybe I should leave it there and take more questions. I'm not quite sure how my time is.
Yeah, that's not, I think stopping there sounds perfect. I'll start. I'm going to add, for our recording purposes, add our speakers back to the room. All right. Yeah, so again, thank you, Cuti and Jane and Alex, for sharing about what's going on in each of your areas. And we'll open it up for questions. So if you have a question, please raise your hand. I'll call on you. And if you want to, then you can unmute yourself and ask your question. Though I do know there was a question in the chat for Cuti about what do some of Spain's military programs look like? So I think for many people in the United States, we are unfamiliar with what a lot of Spain's military programs are. So if you could share some of your knowledge about that.
You can see the military spend in this web. Wait a moment. And I don't know what exactly do you need to know.
Like what is Spain's military? What is it doing right now?
Yes, Spain is a part of the NATO, and so they have a few service in foreign service. I can search, but I don't know now where they are spending the money of the Spanish. Well, I don't know what to say.
Okay, I'll leave it there, and we can let others ask questions. I see Eleanor has her hand raised.
Hi. I was wondering, the English presentation started off saying that being against the military, against war, against killing would be divisive, but Extinction Rebellion is for saving people's lives, and saying, oh, but we need a military to protect ourselves just doesn't seem to make a whole lot of sense when war is clearly the major driver of the eco catastrophe we're fighting.
I could
So
take
you
that
think
one.
that we're going to talk about that?
Yeah, no, I mean, thanks for the question. You're absolutely right. There is a branch of Extinction Rebellion that specifically deals with that. And in fact, yes, 2 days ago in Glasgow, there was a march that ended at BAE Systems, which makes a lot of the equipment for nuclear bombs that go on the UK's Trident submarines. And so, yeah, that's certainly that aspect of the whole story is definitely important, something that Extinction Rebellion campaigns upon. However, we felt like a weakness of the Earth tax strike, the income tax campaign, was that it had too many targets, I guess, that it wasn't coherent. So I mentioned the poll tax strike. That has a sort of an elegance, right? Because the poll tax is unpopular, and if you don't pay, if everyone just doesn't pay it, then it just doesn't exist. That has a sort of a I remember one of the things that made me excited about tax striking was a speech or a talk from David Gross, who I think many of you will know. He came to speak to Money Rebellion, and he really made the point that coherent tax campaigns are really catch the imagination. And so we felt like we wanted to keep the number of targets limited. So it came under the headline of Stop the Harm, which is something that a slogan that Money Rebellion has used. And we absolutely could have included Trident in that. But we chose to keep the number of targets more limited. So I hope that answers your question.
Well, I hope you would reconsider.
I think it's a good topic for another. There are other war tax campaigns in the UK. So I think we ultimately, I mean, where the money was going to go was to a rewilding, earth regeneration charity. And so I think we were focusing on ecological damage. And I mean, that's not to say that Trident and other military, other military projects haven't led to ecological degradation. It's just that it was less direct. And so in order to
Clear war.
Sorry?
I'm sorry, Eleanor, we want to make sure other people have time for questions. So I'm gonna move over to, I'll let Jane speak and then we'll go to Joshua.
Thank you. I just wanted to add to what Alex was saying, and I concur with everything he said. And it's interesting because I was inspired to think that a tax strike would be a good thing, because I knew one of the members of the Peace Tax 7, which is a group of 7 people who went to court striking on a tax strike precisely against military spending. And when we were putting our campaign together, our Earth Tax strike together, I tried to contact the main British war tax resistance group, and their name escapes me at this moment, but you guys might know better than me, actually. Anyway, I emailed them repeatedly, and I never got any response, because there had been the thought about maybe we need to coordinate with them, and also we could learn from them because they've been going for a while, but they never even replied in any way, which made it a bit difficult. And yeah, I mean, I agree with you. War kills people. The whole business of trying to stop emissions and stop unnecessary death and suffering, it's all tied up together, and it should be part of the same campaign. What we wanted to do, as Alex said, was to have a simple strap line at this stage. And I think that the only point at which we would be able to reconsider would be if we got more uptake, because at the moment I feel we're struggling.
Thank you. Joshua, you have the next question.
Yeah, appreciate everybody speaking, and it's really interesting to get the opinions from people across the pond. My question is related to green passes, and so the COVID passes, and just if you all have noticed that, I know here in the United States, people are losing their jobs, and it's not a good thing, but it's also, it can mean people can really quickly see the seriousness of the states trying to wrangle control. I know we don't hear much about Europe. It's just not news. I know Italy, there are people who are vaccinated who are protesting in solidarity these efforts to control and divide societies. And I was just curious, and Dee, this question would go for you in Switzerland too. If just you've noticed that people have come out in the streets because they're seeing this great reset as more control and attempts by the states to, I guess, just, yeah, influence people's lives.
Who should take that question?
I guess I guess I don't know of like the UK or Spain or any of these countries' attempts to implement green passes, the sort of vaccine passports. And if anyone sees this as, like I do, as another part of state control, and
there isn't a green pass exactly in the UK. There have been a very limited number of controversial mandates. In general, the uptake of the vaccine has been really high, or higher in the UK than in many other countries. So I recognize these issues as really complicated. There certainly are people in the UK that aren't comfortable taking the vaccine. So yeah, as a medical researcher, I feel really, I've had conversations with people that are very uncomfortable taking the vaccine, and I feel sad. I guess I feel partly responsible as part of the sort of medical research community that trust is so low. But I don't see that as directly relevant to I don't know. I don't see that.
Here, and I agree. I don't know if that, I think it's obviously an important topic. I don't know if it cuts into our exact questions about tax resistance.
I guess.
But so I think I'd really like to move on to Dee's question for now.
Okay, I've got a number of questions, so cut me off when you think you've heard enough. First is a comment. I would support Jane on the business of not confusing the matter by campaigning on two issues at once, however valid both of them are. I think we've had this in the peace tax movement. People want to campaign for peace tax and against nuclear weapons and against arms exports. But, money is spent on the military, even though not nuclear weapons. Secondly, the 3% question, this is again is something that has hit us in the peace tax movement, that in fact, if you withhold 3% of your tax, 3% of what they actually take from you is spent on military expenditure or ungreen expenditure or whatever it is that you're withholding against. The only way to make sure that you are not contributing to this is to withhold all your tax until such a time as it is, as you can be assured that it will not be directed in this way, and of course to withhold it or redirect it in such a way that you're not just putting it in your own pocket, because that obviously is the first thing that people say, oh well, etc. look, I think I'll leave it at that because that will give other people the chance to bring their questions up.
Jane, did you want to start with that question?
I'm very happy to, except I sort of feel it's not even a question, and I agree exactly with what Dee has said. I mean, I think you're quite right that the logical thing to do really would be to withhold all one's tax, because the 97% of my tax that I have paid, they will take fossil fuel funding out, money. Spend it. So yeah, it's logical to withhold the whole thing. I suppose the thing that's interesting really is, what is one's purpose in trying to do this? And I guess I think the purpose, which in my head has signally failed so far, but the purpose is to raise awareness. There are a lot of sensible, responsible, tax-paying citizens who really, really think that our money is being wrongly spent. And it should be equally possible to raise awareness with a 3% non-payment as with a 100% non-payment. I would not like to be open to accusations of not paying any tax, because it's very easy to attack people for, you're not funding our hospitals, you're not funding education, you're not funding law and order, we need these things, do you want society to break down? Whereas if I say very precisely, I am withholding that for that reason, if that can be amplified, that would do the job for me.
Sure, Alex?
I think, yeah, Jane's absolutely right. There was some discussion of not paying all of the tax, or at least the legal consequences. So sooner or later, yeah, not paying any income tax is definitely whatever taken very seriously. And sooner or later, you would have a committal to prison hearing. So that's where you would be called. It's not a conventional court case. You would just be asked, is this you? Are you really refusing to pay? And then you'd just be taken to prison. And there was some discussion about whether that was like apparently you can have the committal to prison hearing and then pay on the day, right? So you get press attention for the hearing, and then you can pay, and you don't actually go to prison. So there was some discussion of doing that, I guess, as a bit of a stunt. But I think, yeah, the reason that Jane gave, that it feels it doesn't feel like it directly supports the 3% payment. It felt like the messaging is somewhat conflicting. And also, I guess we had really hoped to get a famous person or two, frankly, to join. And that still might happen. I mean, this is where Jane said, I feel more positive. Like, I feel like many of the money rebellion tactics have been brilliant, and others still have a lot of potential. So, this one, there's no reason why it couldn't turn into something yet.
Thank you. Cuti, in Spain, I know you said there's about 400 people that together resist about 25,000 euros. Is there a common amount or percentage that each person normally resists or does not pay?
In Spain, we try not to pay the calculated proportional part of taxes for military purposes. These are about 1,000 euros per person per year. But we have, for a few years ago, we have fines. So now we are making objection for about 10 heroes or so on.
Thank you. Robert, you have a question.
Actually, I don't have much of a question. I have more of a comment or a thought. First of all, I don't want to second guess people's choices in other places about the best tactics. And even though I disagree with it, I would certainly defer to those of you who are there on your choice to not include the military part of taxation in your campaigning. I'm saddened by that choice, but if it's only a tactical choice, fine. What bothers me is that is some of what I'm hearing about a failure to understand that it's all one movement and it's all the same system. It's not a matter of getting into a different silo if you talk about different ways in which our taxes are undermining ourselves and our environment. It's all the same. It's not muddying the waters to include something which is in fact has already muddied the water. It's trying to make clear the stream that's carrying us towards extinction. And so I would just caution us to or encourage us to get out of this old idea that there's anti-militarism, there's anti-fossil fuel, there's pro this and anti that. It's all the same system. And thinking forward, I would encourage those of us who are working on climate change to remember that if we're not very, very careful, the end result of the climate crisis is that we're all going to be living under military dictatorships. I don't know how it is in your country, but in this country, when the public is asked to rank institutions in terms of their favorability, the military always comes out on top. It's the most trusted institution. And so if we're not willing to make it very clear that this is not a solution to the kind of chaos that climate crisis is moving us towards, I guarantee you the military is ready to step in. In this country, the Pentagon was one of the first institutions to point out that climate is a national security issue. And when you've got a national security problem, who do you turn to? You turn to the military. So I think it's short-sighted to not include that as part of any effort to work on climate change, just as it's short-sighted for anti-militarists not to work on climate change, on racism, and on other things that, and on capitalism. Jane, you did a good job of talking about the inevitable result of capitalism. Because as Martin Luther King Jr. said, racism, economic exploitation, militarism, they're all the triplets that we have to work against. And we now have added to that climate destruction. So I'm sorry, Lincoln, for going on and on, but there's my sharing.
Sure. Let's do Jane first and then Alex.
Robert, thank you very much for making that point. And may I share my screen and just refer you back to the last but one slide I showed you, which is this one. Now, this is a photo taken 2 days ago in Glasgow. These are Extinction Rebellion protesters, and I think you can probably read their notices. COP26, count the military carbon footprint. Climate chaos creates war. Climate chaos, war, refugees. So we are extremely aware as a movement that the military is a huge problem and that the climate, the climate crisis, if you like, plays into their hands in a sense. Okay, I take on board what you say, and I think we are open to criticism for not including it in our tax resistance strike. It is very much in our heads as a group, as a movement. Okay, thank you.
Sure. And Alex?
Yeah, I mean, I agree. I think that photo was from the protest that I mentioned a couple of days ago at BAE Systems. I think we felt like each tax strike can't be about everything, right? I think that's an issue for Money Rebellion more generally, is that, and honestly for the climate movement, for climate movement, is that you can't talk about anything, any part of it, without it connecting to every other part of it, right? I think when XR first started, Jane listed those 3 demands. It was just had a sort of a beautiful simplicity, is just like, we march on the government and we're demanding this, we're demanding this, we're demanding this. And I think increasingly, it's obvious that was a vast simplification, like, of the situation, right? Like the tactic of just sitting in the road is not enough, and just the government just sort of going ping and doing stuff is also, that's not, that's a vast oversimplification. And so ultimately we feel like we have to circumscribe somehow. I mean, I totally take your point, and I think that actually including Trident not only would be more holistic and would allow us to make points about the connection, the many connections between militarism and nuclear war and climate and social ecological breakdown. I think it would allow us to talk about that in our letter to the revenue, but also it potentially reach out to another group that might resist tax with us, right? There are, so yeah, at the demo at BAE Systems were some people from Code Pink who talked about they talked about the American the issue from an American angle, and made the connection with the UK nuclear program is absolutely tied to the American nuclear program and couldn't exist without it. And I'm not sure what I was going to say. Yeah, well, there are, I guess, yeah, the point there is that there are a number of people that, for whom the peace and the nuclear aspect is the thing that they particularly care about. And so if we included the Trident in our calculation, and then maybe withheld 4% of our taxes, that would potentially appeal, that would potentially make the strike appeal to them as well. So it's quite likely worth trying.
Thank you. Next, I see Bill's hand is up.
Hi, thank you to all the panelists and everybody who's asking questions. I am interested in, have you had any success in getting attention or action from the political establishment and the government? What prompted this question was the suggestion that Extinction Rebellion would try to attract a famous person to do that, as part of their publicity. In the US, in past years, we've had famous people, Joan Baez, Julia Butterfly Hill, who have made prominent statements against it, and still we have no action of any significance. So I think that strategies to get attention of the government are really they're important to me. So I think I'd just be interested in comments on that. Thank you.
So I think that was, the question was about XR as a whole. To what extent has XR managed to get the attention of the government, the establishment? Is that correct?
That's fine. Oh, sorry. Am I still?
Okay.
Yes, that would be fine. I'm just interested
Okay.
in strategies.
Yeah, sure. I mentioned the famous person specifically with regards to the campaign, the tax strike campaign. I think we thought that, as Jane said, it's mainly self-employed people that are eligible for the income tax strike in the UK just because of the way that we are taxed. And so that felt something that was likely to happen, and we were disappointed that it didn't. Examples of the wider Extinction Rebellion movement getting the attention of the establishment, I think there are many. One particularly good example from about a year ago was when we blocked all of the distribution centers for newspapers of Rupert Murdoch's presses. I believe there are 3 in the UK, and so they were blocked. The road outside was blocked for all night, and so the following day, no newspapers were delivered for The Sun and The Times and 2 or 3 other papers that I forget. And this caused absolute outrage among the very top of the cabinet. There is, Boris Johnson and Priti Patel, the Home Secretary, both made statements about, defending our freedom, that this was an assault, a desperate assault on our freedom. And I think many commentators felt that really starts to draw back the curtain and lets you know what they see as freedom. That was a really interesting one. And then more recently, there have been a lot of efforts to, been a campaign that grew out of, or it's very much separate from Extinction Rebellion, but has some overlap, is called Insulate Britain, which you may have heard of. And this involves blocking motorways again and again, day after day. And it is centered around London. So this is directly targeting commuters, London commuters. And this has been extraordinarily divisive, as you can imagine. And so that's again a campaign that when it first started or before it happened, I felt really uncomfortable about, but that has really in a big way sort of created public outrage, drawn back the curtain on, I guess, to be a bit more specific, the demand is that the UK government insulate homes, starting with social housing, so that's the poorest people. And it particularly points to fuel poverty. There are a large number of people in the UK that can't properly afford to heat their homes. And so it's obviously a very what's the word? It's a very strong tactic used for a absolutely whatever common sense demand that no one could possibly argue with. And so you'll be unsurprisingly the government's response to that has been to not talk about the demand, which they already promised to do at all. No discussion of that, but they have created new laws to punish the protesters, some of whom are facing multiple years in prison, which will be decided quite soon. So I think those are examples of campaigns that have really obviously scared the establishment.
Thank you.
Thanks. Next in the queue, I see Ruth.
Oh, well, actually, I had a different question, but I would be interested in hearing from Spain about the reaction of the government also. And I'll just put my question in after that, but it'd be good to hear from Spain. It was just about, mostly for the whole group, about this trying to build a wider movement and get more anti-war people in the climate movement or vice versa, and working together more. And if any of you have any good models of how successful that's been, I mean, I'm in New York City, we're out with XR and the other groups, and we're the ones with the anti-war banners, but it's not really coming from the other groups or, you know, whatever the connection. So I'm just interested in also how other people have made any connections, found it successful.
Thanks. So yeah, maybe Cuti, you could start. Has the war tax resistance of Grup Antimilitarista Tortuga, has there been a government response?
I don't know if I understand exactly the question, but when we do the protest, we often fines. We often receive fines. I don't know if this is the question, but for us, this is not why. Although we receive fines, we will continue to protest.
Thank you. Yeah, then the other question for everybody, which now I can't think of, but you heard it. Someone.
Can I try to translate Ruth's question? Cuti, Ruth quiere saber qué piensa el gobierno de las acciones de su grupo. Okay, so I just asked, what does the government think about the actions of his group?
Well, they think that we are not right, but we will continue to protest.
¿Y qué el gobierno hace sobre la resistencia?
Nos ponen multas.
So what does the government do against the resistance?
They ignore us or give us fines.
Yeah, thank you, Jenny, for the translation. And Ruth's other question, I believe, was about collaboration, and growing collaboration with other groups. Sure.
So there is an Extinction Rebellion peace group, which maybe you're aware of. They were certainly very active in October 2019. I was familiar with their actions back then. And then they spoke, a representative from that group spoke a couple of days ago. And so I'm not sure, they still exist, but I'm not sure how, I don't know how much energy is going into that. But maybe it would be interesting to get in touch with them. I can try and find a link.
Sure, maybe I'll move on to Susan.
I assume you mean me, one of the three Susans in the group.
Yes.
Hey, everybody, it's great to see you and really good to hear about campaigns in other countries. The issue I want to bring up is how, in the case of climate resistance, how personal action and institutional action can go together. It seems that whether we're boycotting taxes for militarism or for climate, we're demanding major changes in our institutions. And with militarism, we have fewer options for personal actions other than to kind of be willing to make the kind of sacrifices that might come from the government response to our resistance. But with climate, we're asking for institutions to make major changes, but sometimes there's a controversy as to the importance of making those changes in our own lives. So for example, it just occurred to me in hearing about Barclay, campaign on Barclays, for example, that we're telling them not to make loans to the petrochemical industries, but every time we fill up our tank or turn on the gas in our home, we are helping repay those loans. So we are very directly contributing to the system that we're trying to undo. And I personally would like to see us combine those individual life changes with the institutional campaigns. I'm wondering to what degree that is part of the campaign in Spain and in Great Britain.
Can I leap in there, Lincoln?
Definitely.
Thank you, Susan, for that question. It's a very good question, and I think it's a it's an endless argument, like individual versus system change. I mean, that's kind of a cliche. And I think one of the problems is that quite a long time ago, some of the biggest and most polluting companies like British Petroleum, BP, they actually found a very clever way of making individuals feel responsible for the climate emergency. And they were the ones who propagated the notion of your carbon footprint. Add up your own carbon footprint and what can you do? Can you, once a week not use your car? Making people feel A, as if they were responsible, and B, as if they could fix it. Now, I agree with you. Individuals can and should do something, and nobody wants to be a hypocrite. But on the other hand, actually, massively, by far, the destruction of our climate is happening by oil companies, by coal companies, but the individual difference that individuals can make is minuscule. I mean, like a fly. It's so to be diverted from action for system change into trying to kind of cultivate your own garden. It seems to me to be a worrying suggestion. I went to a very good talk by someone who's quite influential in XR. He's called Larch Maxey, and he was very, very strong on how individuals should not feel that it's down to them, and that it's very, very important, if you have any energy, if you have any time, to try and direct it towards system change, because that's the only thing that can save us.
Sure, maybe a brief comment from Alex, so we can get to the other questions.
Yeah, no, I mean, I agree with James. I think I would add that it's also a strategy, right? If you're going after individuals, then you need to try and get to every single individual. Whereas if you're focusing on system change, then with the limited resources that we have, for example, we can go after financial regulators. So in the UK, the Bank of England is a really good example. So they claim to work for the good of the people of the United Kingdom, and yet they are allowing banks to spend all this money on fossil fuels. Banks, their whatever mandate is to earn as much money as possible for their shareholders. So in principle, they're doing what they should be doing, while it's still legal, obviously. Susan, you mentioned conservation as well. I think there's a good point there, is that there are a number of conservationists in XR that feel like their colleagues focus on small issues, so they are able to win small battles, but in the context of losing the war in a big way. And so conservationists need to rethink and, you know, equivalently focus on system change rather than sort of smaller projects.
Thank you. Jack, you have your hand up.
Well, it's more of a comment that I put a little bit in the chat, but it seems to me that it's not an issue of individual change versus system change. We all want change, and what comes down to is what we can do, both as individuals and as community and as nation states, what we can do to work for change. And I think we have to see that this is all part of a continuum or an arc that's leading towards change. And so I don't want to see the individual change being denigrated because it's not, quotes, effective. I think there's sort of a wall that goes up when people start thinking like that in terms of, well, is this action effective? I think the bigger question for humanity is this action symbolic? Does it have any sacramental qualities? I mean, we as people, we thrive on myths, whether it's Adam and Eve or Gilgamesh. Those myths influence very much how we think. And so I think we have to remember that we tend to think of myth as untruth. And in fact, what myth does is unmask the truth. Now, maybe this is a little too philosophical, but I think we have to see these things on a continuum, and they all contribute towards the change that we need. So enough said.
Yes, thank you for your comment, Jack. Did anyone want to respond to that comment, or we could? Sure. Or I could go to the next. Sure.
Well,
Alex?
quickly, I think if I understood correctly, I think I guess the way that I see activism is like choosing practical ways that you can move the ball forward. I think I increasingly feel that targeting public institutions, I mentioned the Bank of England, I feel that as a really good target because they have enormous power, and yet they don't expect demonstrations against them. They don't expect to be a target. They're just an extremely boring institution, and so but also they like to feel like they are the responsible ones, kind of thing. And also legal regulators, and to some extent private law firms. Also they have lawyers, you know, like to have cogent arguments and be persuasive. You know, they have that opinion of themselves, and so like trying to tap into that. Yes, so as a scientist, medical researcher, and with some sort of doctor colleagues, we try to go after those people and try and sort of ask them what the law is for. Like, what is the Bank of England for? Like, is it just propping up the economy and helping out big banks, or is it actually, as it says on their website, to protect the people of the United Kingdom? Like, those kinds of arguments, I think, really have a lot of mileage. I don't know whether that really answers your question, but thanks for what you had to say.
I think we're getting low on time. So my plan for closing our session out is there's still one person who has a question that we haven't heard from, which is Lindsay. And then after she asks her question and it's whoever responds. Then we'll move on to hear from both Eleanor and Dee. They can ask their questions together. And then we'll have one final statement from each of our speakers where you can either respond to the last question and or close with whatever you think is appropriate. So right now I'll hand it over to Lindsay.
Hi, so I was just wondering, and I think this is for all three of the speakers today, what keeps you going? It sounds like you're having different levels of success. I know as someone who's been involved in both climate activism for like 20 years now and war tax resistance for a long time, and being someone who likes to check things off of lists and be like, yep, we did it, moving on, it can be really tough. So I'm just wondering what your strategies are and how you keep going. And I've attempted to use Google Translate and I'll put that in the chat section if that helps Cuti with understanding my question at all. Thank you.
Sorry, I don't understand your question. Can you repeat slower, please?
Or Cuti, she put it in Spanish in the chat.
Well.
And I'll also just say slower, like, how do you keep going? How do you find a way to keep up this practice?
Well, we come from strong groups of strong groups that work against the compulsory military in Spain about 10 years ago. So now we have groups with a high level of mutual support. And we continue in the job.
Thank you, Jane.
Thank you for the question, Lindsay. It's a really good question. And like you, I spent many years fruitlessly campaigning for climate issues and had more or less given up when Extinction Rebellion was invented. And quite quickly, I was electrified by Extinction Rebellion because they weren't just, marching in the streets. They weren't just having demonstrations. There was a clear plan. There were 3 demands. There were clear ways of action to try and achieve those demands. And I find that really energizing to actually have a clear agenda because, standing in the street and saying this is all terrible feels incredibly ineffectual to me. Whereas if I have a clear agenda for what I'm trying to do, then I can really get behind it. And so for the last 2 years, I've done a lot of work for Extinction Rebellion and not felt jaded because firstly, it feels like we've had a degree of success in the sense that our first demand, to tell the truth, that's happened because it's partly because of climate change and the disasters around the world that have been happening because of climate change. But I mean, it's come to the top of the agenda. It wasn't the top of the agenda 2 years ago. It's come to the top of the agenda. And so that in itself gives me energy to keep campaigning and working for it. The feeling that I'm, part of a group who have a plan.
Alex?
Yes, so there's a piece of XR jargon called like regenerative culture, often shortened to regen. And that is often brought up at the start of meetings like a regen reminder. And it is something that people take very seriously because so many activists get burnt out. There certainly are a number of people that have been extremely committed for some time, and then they feel like they can't go on. They just have become completely overwhelmed. And for me personally, I find that having, like, I work as a scientist, that's part-time at the moment. And so I feel like having that, like having an income, frankly, but also having like something that's slightly separate is sort of balancing and has allowed me to continue. And then I feel like another thing, there's so many different parts of XR. I work quite a lot in the art factory. So that's painting banners and designing visually appealing actions. I found that really exciting. That is very much a contrast to the experience that I've had like professionally. And then obviously just people, I mean, it's simple, but just like having a lot of friends and close networks, people that I feel strongly about. That's another way to be part of the campaign. So I think if a campaign was purely tax resistance, then it wouldn't feel as as complete. You maybe wouldn't make the sort of social connections that you do so Extinction Rebellion has lots of local groups, for example, that meet regularly in person, that kind of thing. Anyway, I don't know if that will work for anyone else, but.
Thank you all.
Yeah, thank you. And so now we'll hear final questions from Eleanor and then Dee, and then we'll move on to our speakers where you can answer those questions or just share your final remarks. So Eleanor.
I put in the chat, nuclear war is ecological destruction. You know, they're two sides of the same coin. And what else would Trident missiles be used for? So I hope you could use that thought to try to bring that up, to bring in resistance to war into your campaign as something that strengthens rather than divides people. And my other question, maybe it's not for this forum, I don't know, but someone else mentioned that we could go after warplane shows as low-hanging fruit to get rid of that obvious pollution that's just for show. And I'm wondering, can I justify my desire to see loved ones that I can travel in a plane because it's so much more convenient for me as mobility challenged, when I know what damage it does?
All right.
I can address either of these two things.
All right, thank you, Eleanor. Then Dee, your question.
Right. First, I haven't mastered putting my label. D is Derek Brett of CPTI. Just to go back to Spain, I think I can give a partial answer to Joshua's question a long time ago, which Cuti may be able to expand upon. As far as I know, Spain doesn't have soldiers fighting anywhere, but they do, I believe, they are one of the European states which hosts American nuclear weapons, although not a nuclear power themselves. And the latest figures I have show them spending 1.4% of GDP on the military. The United States calls on NATO to spend 2%. The UK has just reached that. I assume the United States themselves spend rather more than that on military expenditure.
Right, thank you. So yes, so I'll leave the last words on this with our panelists. If you want to answer one of the questions or just want to share some of your final thoughts for the end of our session today.
Shall I go first? Is that okay? Right, thank you for those last two questions, although I can't have any answer to what Derek said because I don't know at all. And Eleanor, I think it's very interesting, and I feel personally very engaged by your question about justifying getting on a plane to visit loved ones, because I live in England and my mother, who is 93 and not very well, lives in Australia. And obviously that is a horribly long flight, which causes a lot of pollution. And I feel repeatedly torn about whether I should follow my heart and go and see my mother, or whether I should, you know, not cause that carbon emission. And the only answer that I can begin to come up with to that is maybe if we all, you know, in a slightly more ideal world, were given a carbon ration, if we would hold, you know, this year you have so many carbon credits that you can use, and then you choose, you know, you can give up your car and turn down your central heating and not do anything else. And maybe if you saved everything up, then that would your carbon footprint for that year. You could fly to see your mother. I know that sounds a bit mad, but it ties up with what I was trying to say earlier about system change, because for individuals, we can all find really good and passionate reasons for things that we need to do that use carbon. And what we need, if we have system change in the sense that we have agreed by a citizens' assembly a way forward that we must all take, that sets down parameters for how we must behave, then it's going to be a lot easier to make those decisions rather than just on a, you know, one person feels so guilty about it all that they sit at home in the dark, in the cold, and never buy any new clothes and, you know, eat cold planets. And we've got to work together on this. It's such a huge, huge problem. We can't fix it on our own. I'm sorry, I've probably gone off the point, but I'll stop now. Thank you all very much for listening and fantastic questions.
Sure. Cuti, ¿cuáles son tus comentarios finales?
Well, I think militarism and climate change are closely connected, and one of the ways to change this is by making task objections individually and in groups. I want to thank you for letting me to participate in this interesting meeting.
Thank you. And Alex.
Yeah, thanks a lot. No, it was really really interesting to hear from Cuti, and thanks for all of your questions. I will address like Eleanor's. I think thanks a lot. Basically, I think the Trident would make a great addition to that tax campaign. I think another issue which we should absolutely get into is something like reparations for like poorer countries. That's something that, you know, obviously the UK and the US have enormous responsibility for. Like obviously the, you know, UK was enormously involved in colonization and, you know, is, you know, by no coincidence, enormously involved, or basically the center of the world's network of tax havens, right? So London, the city of London is has, you know, just all kinds of different financial responsibilities, and so trying to engineer that aspect of things into some kind of tax resistance campaign is something that I would personally love to do. there is a campaign about Jubilee for Climate, which has just started, which is quite interesting. That's talking about debt relief within the UK as well as for poorer countries. That's obviously something that is like often discussed at COP conferences. The language is called, or the jargony phrase is loss and damage, right? So that's in the Paris Agreement. There was a whole page about when, or that talked about how poorer countries, in principle, could claim losses and damages from climate disasters. And then, you know, rich countries got together and added a little clause down the bottom saying like, oh yes, and there's no liability, you know, like, yeah, this is unenforceable basically, which is obviously a disgrace. I believe they're going to be discussing that next week in Glasgow here. So anyway, yeah, I guess what I mean by that is that there are obviously just endless different things that we could try to add to our campaign to make it more complete. Do I have anything to say about what's going on the street? Was that the question? It's gone away.
Yes, that was the question.
So it was the global day of action. So this was the largest day within Glasgow. So there were tens of thousands of people marching. Yesterday were school strikers. So that's the whatever, Fridays for Future. That was also, I don't know exactly numbers, but more than 10,000. Today was many different groups. So yeah, and the messaging was quite vague, as you can imagine. If lots of different groups were coming together, it was basically just trying to prompt COP to do better or something. I think there wasn't very specific messaging, like as an umbrella. Obviously, each group brought a lot of different whatever suggestions, demands. But yeah, I mean, I think that's been my impression of activities in Glasgow. Like, I've really enjoyed connecting with other groups. There's a various a group from France, a group from, anyway, so there's people from all around the world here, and so connecting with them has been fantastic. But in terms of actually getting through to delegates, I think, you know, limited, unfortunately.
On behalf of NWTRC, on behalf of everyone who's at this session today, thank you, Alex, Jane, and Cuti. Thank you so much for all of your wonderful words and powerful stories and all of the important work that you're working on. It's really been inspirational.